when I work with consulting clients, if someone will ask me a question, I'll say, I think that's a good idea. This should work. It's probably a good strategy. We might want to think about pursuing this. I do a lot of what we all do, which is hedge my statements, right? Phrases like I think, might, could, possibly, seems, all kind of back away from what we're saying. And while we do that a lot as a common verbal tic, without intending to, it often undermines what we're trying to do, because it makes us less persuasive. In research we conducted, we find that the more hedges someone uses, the more they hedge in their statements, the less likely other people are to listen to what they have to say and follow their advice, because very simply, it makes us seem less confident.
You better know, we ain't never going home, ain't never going home. You better know, we ain't never going home, ain't never going home.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode. Today, we're talking about magic words. So to kick things off, I want to share a story about how two simple little letters modifying a word can completely change the way that you persuade and create change in the people around you. So there was a group of scientists at Stanford that set out to understand how to persuade a group of 4 and 5-year-olds to do something that no child wants to do, and that's clean up. The findings were striking. Children were asked to help to clean up in 2 ways. The first, they were just asked to help clean up. The second, they were asked to be a helper. Adding those 2 simple little letters increased the number of children who helped clean by 30%. This is a striking difference when you consider that it's just this minor, nuanced way in which the language was changed, but yet the result and the output were completely different. So in this episode, we explore a number of examples of how you can use magic words to be more effective in your everyday life. We talk about things like what language is most likely to help you land investment, how to motivate teams, how to be perceived as more confident, how to be perceived as more credible, and on and on. Before we dive in, an introduction to today's guest. Our guest, Jonah Berger, is a Wharton School professor and an internationally best-selling author of 4 books, which have sold millions and millions of copies across the globe and have been published in more than 35 countries. His books include Contagious, Why Things Catch On, Invisible Influence, The Hidden Forces That Shape Behavior, The Catalyst, How to Change Anyone's Mind, and most recently, the topic of today's discussion, Magic Words, What to Say to Get Your Way. If you're new to the show, my name is Brendan Dell. I'm a marketer and a messaging strategist for the largest brands in the world today. I'm fascinated by language and the impact it can have on behavior. If you're interested in topics like this, I would encourage you to subscribe. We publish new episodes every single week. And with that, let's get into the episode. Cheers, Jonah. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, so today we're going to talk about magic words. So I thought it would be fitting to start a conversation with the copy experiment. Could you tell us that story?
Yes, yeah. So I think even before I talk about that, though, it might be worth taking a step back and say, well, why do we care about words, right? I mean, what I think is interesting is we all use words all the time, right? We use words to write emails. We use words to make presentations. We use words to advertise what we're doing. As leaders, we use words to make speeches and make phone calls and convince others to do things. We use words to hold attention. They're how everybody does what they do. In fact, even our private thoughts often rely on language. But while we pay a lot of attention to what we want to communicate, so if I'm a startup founder, for example, and I get up in a meeting and I talk about why I think we should take a certain course of action, I've got my main bullet points that I want to get across. We think a lot less about how we say those things, the particular words we use. And that's a mistake, because the words we use can have a big impact on our effectiveness. So you ask about the copier experiment. One of the studies I talk about in the beginning of a book is something was done a number of years ago around a copy machine, which is that, people were waiting in a library, and this was, I believe, in the 60s or 70s, waiting in the library to use a copy machine. And there was a long line. Someone was using the machine. And someone came up to them and said, basically, hey, can I use the machine? Even though you're doing it, can I come up and use the machine instead? Now, obviously, most of us are not trying to get other people to use copy machines anymore, right? That's not a problem that we have, but we're trying to get other people to do something. And many of those people, just like folks that are making copies, don't want to take the time out of what they're doing to let us do what we need to do. And so they looked at what led people to say, yes, what led people to say, sure, yeah, you can use the machine even if I was already on it. And they found that one particular word had a big impact. It led to over a 50% increase in the percentage of people that agreed to let someone else use the copier. And that word was because. Right? People said something like, can I cut in front of you, use the copier because X, Y, Z. And you might say, well, what do you mean that's just one word, right? I mean, isn't the reason they came up with really important, right? If they had a good reason, someone would say yes. And if they had bad reason, someone would say no. But they looked at this. They actually had some people say, hey, can I cut in front of you in line because I need to make copies? Now, that's obvious, right? You're clearly cutting in line because you need to make copies, but even adding a reason that wasn't a very good one made people say yes. And that's just one example, the power of the word because. But throughout the book, I talk about a variety of different types of language and how they can do everything from make us more persuasive and more impactful as influencers, how they can hold the attention of our audiences and folks who want to change their minds, and how it can help us connect with others in various aspects of our lives.
Yeah, it's interesting how much how you deliver a message impacts the reception of the message, irregardless of the core of that message. How the same, information communicated in two different ways. One of the examples you use in your book, actually, the kind of jumping around from the text there, but is the Donald Trump example of some of the way that he communicated. And I thought that was a really interesting example. Would you tell that story a little bit about, you're talking about a guy who had no real reason that we should believe that, and this is not a political statement, that he should be good at this job. He had no historical context of, working in politics. But he spoke in a certain way that it got people to listen.
Yeah. And so first of all, just as you said, I don't want to talk about politics, right? I know that some people hate Donald Trump, and I know that some people love Donald Trump. Whether you love him or hate him, you can't deny that he's been a great salesperson for his ideas, right? Even if you hate him and hate everything he stands for, he's had an amazing ability to get a whole bunch of people to do what he wants and follow his suggestions. And so one question is why, right? How has he been so good at doing that? If you look at one of his early speeches, for example, when he announced his candidacy, he said something like, look, we need to be more effective as a nation. We need to build a wall, and I build all the walls all the time. And I build them great and inexpensively. And, we don't win anymore. We used to win trade deals with China, and now we don't. And if, I win all the time with China, I win all the time, and lots of things along those lines. And some people who heard that speech said, this is ridiculous. It's simplistic. It's bluster. There's no content. And yet a year later, he was elected president of the United States. So again, whether you like him or not, I want to set that aside. Something he's doing is working. What is that something? And if you actually look at what he does the same thing that a lot of other individuals we often describe as charismatic do. Right? We all have someone in our lives that we know that when they speak, other people listen. You look at sort of, really powerful startup founders like a Steve Jobs or something whose wisdom lives on for decades. You look at gurus that people listen to, a lot of these individuals, and they all do one thing in particular, which is they speak with a great deal of certainty. Right? They don't just say, this is a good idea. This is clearly a great idea. This is definitely the right course of action. Everybody agrees. The answer's obvious. They speak like it's certain, like what they're saying is certain. And not surprisingly, when people hear someone who speaks so certainly, they're more likely to listen to that what person has to say, because they're sitting there going, well, if this person's so clear about what it is, it's so obvious to them, it must be true. Contrast that with what most of us do most of the time, right? I'm an academic. I'm guilty of this as much as anybody else. When I work with consulting clients, if someone will ask me a question, I'll say, I think that's a good idea. This should work. It's probably a good strategy. We might want to think about pursuing this. I do a lot of what we all do, which is hedge my statements, right? Phrases like I think, might, could, possibly, seems, all kind of back away from what we're saying. And while we do that a lot, as a common verbal tick, without intending to, it often undermines what we're trying to do because it makes us less persuasive. In research we conducted, we find that the more hedges someone uses, the more they hedge in their statements, the less likely other people are to listen to what they have to say and follow their advice, because very simply, it makes us seem less confident. When we hedge, it makes it seem like we're less sure about what we're talking about. And so why would other people want to listen? And so the first takeaway is, hey, look, many of us hedge, not even intending to. We need to ditch the hedges a little bit, right? If we want other people to listen to what we have to say, hedge less. Second, there's certain types of hedges that are going to be more impactful. Work we conducted, for example, finds that if I say something like, this seems like it will work, or I say, this seems to me like it will work, the to me version is more effective. Similarly, if rather than saying, this might work, saying, I think this might work is more effective because it positions those statements connected to us. It seems to me suggests not that it's generally uncertain, but this is my opinion and I'm willing to stand by it, which makes us seem more confident and makes us more persuasive as a result. And so, sure, there are times we have to hedge. There are times when there's uncertainty. We can also shrink the things we're uncertain about. I think this is the best course of action, but to make it be successful, we need to do X, Y, Z. We're not saying, I don't know if this will work. We're saying, I'm sure this is the right course, but we need to do these things to make it happen. And so more certainty will often increase our impact.
I found in my own practice that something I just learned not through research, but through trial and error is I'd get asked a question by a client and I would say something like, well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One might be this, one might be that. And when I changed that statement and said, okay, so there's 3 reasons that people aren't going to invest in your company and gave them a definitive then all of a sudden it was received in a completely different way, even though the world is nuanced and even though there's a variety of reasons why someone might not invest in your company. Speaking with those kind of definitive statements just completely change the reception. And so it's something I've worked really hard to do is get succinct about the way
and notice, Stephen, I really like the way you phrased it, right? You don't know which of the 3 it is. Right? But you're saying there are 3 reasons that someone wouldn't invest in your company. You may not be sure which one it is, but rather than focusing on the uncertainty, you're focusing on the certainty. Here's the set of possibilities. I know it's at least one of these 3.
So for someone who wants to be more effective with their language, with their words, it sounds like you discovered there's kind of 6 buckets in which you can think about sort of tranching out what's going to help you be more effective. Could you give folks like a primer on these 6 categories?
Yeah. So, based on the research that I and others have done in this space, looking across a variety of different domains, from workplace to personal life, from persuading others to being better problem solvers, from getting people to help out and solve problems to even being more creative, we found 6 types of language came up again and again. And so in Magic Words, I put them in a framework. It's called the SPEACC framework. It's SPEACC. Wasn't clever enough to come out with something that ended with a K, but as someone pointed out, K is the toughest word to use in Scrabble, so I don't feel so badly about that. But nice. SPEACC stands for first, the language of similarity and difference. Second, words that help us pose questions. That's the P. Third, the language of emotion is the E. The A is language of agency and identity. And the C's, one of which we just talked about, is confidence, and the other C is concreteness. And so those are 6 buckets of language that if we understand them and the strategies underneath, and usually just like hedges, I mentioned at least 3 or 4 strategies underneath them, we can increase our impact in every domain of our lives.
Let's use one example, and I'm not sure if this fits perfectly into that. As one example you gave was help versus helper, as something that was more or less effective. And I think this could be illustrated for people about just thinking about their language. What's that story? So
often we're trying to get people to do something, right? And as a leader, as a founder, as a colleague, we may say, hey, can you help me out? Right? Or similarly, if we're a politician, we might say, hey, please go vote. Right? And so often we ask people to do something for us using actions, using verbs. Helping is an action. Voting is an action. We ask people to take an action to do something that we want them to do. But research finds that actually a subtle shift in our language, only a couple of letters, can have a big impact. A few years ago, there was a study done at Stanford University where they went to a local elementary school and they asked students for help cleaning up the classroom. Blocks on the floor, there were crayons everywhere. And so they asked the students for help. And so for some students, they said, hey, can you help clean up? And for other students, they said basically the same thing with 2 letters different. They said, can you be a helper and clean up? Now, help and helper are basically the same, right? You're asking for the same thing, cleaning up, using the word help, but one adds 2 letters on the end, ER. And they found that small difference led to about a 30% increase in the number of students that helped. And it's not just students in a classroom. More recently, a study was done in the context of voting where they asked people to turn out and cast their ballot. They sent thousands of mailings to people's homes. And for some people, they got a mailing said, please go vote. And for other people, they said, basically, please go be a voter. Again, very subtly different. Vote versus voter. There's only one letter difference, an R at the end of vote. Yet there it led to a 15% increase in this percentage of people that turned out. And the reason why is that by turning actions into identities, we can get people to be more likely to do something because they want to claim that desired identity. Voting is good, right? Helping is good, but being a helper, being a voter, well, those are desirable identities. And so if I can do something to claim those desired identities, I'm much more likely to want to do it, right? Voting is fine, but if voting is a way to show myself and others that I'm a good person, I'm a voter, I'm more likely to do it. Same with helping. The opposite is true, though, on the negative side, right? Losing is bad. Being a loser is worse. Cheating is bad. Being a cheater is even worse. Some researchers were trying to get students to stop cheating in a classroom. They found that framing cheating as a way to be a cheater, cheating would indicate you're a cheater, made people much less likely to cheat. And so whether we're trying to get people to do something or not do something, turning those actions into identities can be a really effective way to motivate action. Similarly, even if we're just describing ourselves or describing someone else, we can use the same idea, right? So imagine I told you about two people. I have one friend who runs and I have another friend who is a runner. You had to guess which of those two people do you think runs more often?
Yeah, certainly the one who is a runner.
The one who is a runner, right? That's a stable aspect of their identity, right? I didn't just found a company, I'm a founder, right? That's now a more stable aspect of your identity. You don't just drink coffee, you're a coffee lover. You don't just like dogs, you're a dog lover. Those things seem more stable. If we describe ourselves as hardworking, people think, oh yeah, we're somewhat hardworking. If we say we're a hard worker, suggests it's a more stable trait. Someone isn't just creative, they're a creator. Right? Someone doesn't just innovate, they're an innovator. Framing these things as stable traits, as identities, makes it seem like they're more likely to last. And so it can help how we're perceived as well as how the folks we talk about are perceived as well.
Human beings are just wildly curious creatures, are we not? You change two letters on a word and you get, 30%, it's easy to say that's a huge order of magnitude difference in the way somebody behaves. If you start to extrapolate that over a large population, that's mind control. Not to a small degree.
I wouldn't use the word control.
It's exaggeration.
Encouraging people to go in a particular, and yes, it's startling in some ways, but think about this way, right? If you understand the science of hitting, you get on base more in baseball. If you understand the science of, shooting a basketball, more of your free throws go in. Same is true with language, right? Language is something we do all the time. Just like you can, become a better basketball shooter or a baseball hitter or a better swimmer, whatever you do in your life, by understanding how language works, you can use it more effectively.
One of the things I wanted to make sure we touched on in this talk, because I know we have short window here, is the aspect of raising money. So I've helped dozens of companies raise money. This is part of what I do. And so this is something that you researched and discovered, and something that I found fascinating to see in the book because it's something I intuited from repetition. But tell us the story of the optimal kind of language to use when you're trying to get somebody to invest in a business, abstract versus concrete.
So a friend and colleague of mine at Harvard did some work on startup founders and their language, and looked at language in a variety of pitches. And they found something quite interesting. So often concrete language is really good. And what do I mean by concrete language? Well, words that you can touch, see, and feel, right? So a table is very concrete. The word strategy is not. I can't touch strategy. I can't see strategy. I can touch a table. Saying a car is beautiful, that's sort of abstract. Saying it's cherry red is something that we can see, right? Saying you'll get a refund soon in customer service is pretty abstract. Saying your money will be there tomorrow is really concrete. And so across many domains, concrete language is useful. But when they're looking at startups and how they pitch themselves, they actually found that concrete language wasn't as good as abstract language. actually being concrete hurt the amount of money that startups raised. And so it's better to be abstract rather than concrete. And this goes against a lot of things we might think about in terms of language, where concreteness is easier to understand, concreteness is easier to visualize and remember. So why is abstract language better at raising money? And the basic idea is this, right? Abstract language is very broad and big. Concrete language is very narrow and specific. And so concrete language gives people a really good sense of what you're doing, but it can make it seem rather small, right? If we say, hey, Uber helps you get a ride from your home to the office, that's really concrete. Uber is a car that picks you up and gets you from the home to the office. I have a really good sense of what they do. If instead you said, hey, Uber's a transportation solution, I don't know exactly what you do, but let me tell you, it seems bigger, right? It seems bigger than just getting me in a car from my home to the office. And so looking across a variety of different pitches and the funding they were able to raise, they found that abstract language is better, basically because it makes it seem broader and more possible, right? It makes it seem like this company could do many different things, could take over many different verticals. And so as long as people have enough of a sense of what you're doing, abstractness can be beneficial.
Hey, quick interjection here. So are you trying to go out and raise money to build your business, and maybe you're not sure how to frame your investment narrative to get the yes, or maybe you run out and you pitched a handful of investors and you're not getting the response that you're looking for? If yes, I've got something for you. My new course, The $1 Billion Pitch, is now live. If you're unfamiliar with me, I'm a messaging strategist for the fastest growing brands in tech today. I've helped brands like HP, Expedia, Y Combinator portfolio companies, 500 startup portfolio companies, and on raise more than 100 million in venture capital dollars, as well as drive more than 130 million in enterprise sales using the exact framework that I'm going to teach you in this course. Inside, you'll learn the 8 elements that you need to define to get to your yes, along with templates and a walkthrough of successful pitches to make the process of building your pitch simple and highly effective. So if you're interested, brendandell.com/masterclass to see testimonials from dozens of founders and tech leaders like you. You can see the success they've had implementing the framework. To help you get started, use the code STARTUP for the next 24 hours. You'll get 20% off on the course. These are 5- and 6-figure engagements when I work directly with brands, and it's now available to you at a fraction of the price. But you got to sign up in the next 24 hours to get the special price. With that, let's get back to the episode. Yeah, it's interesting because the opposite, well, at least in my experience, perhaps you found different, but the opposite becomes true when you go to try to sell the thing.
Oh, yes. I don't want a transportation solution. I want to ride to the office. Right. And so, I very much agree when talking to customers. And so, concrete language is here and now and doable, right? I know that if I buy this, this is the problem that it will solve. But often when you're trying to raise funding, you're not trying to tell them exactly what you're doing. You're trying to sell them on the possibility of what you have to offer. And in those cases, abstract language is better.
We've got just a couple minutes left. So I had a couple of quick kind of off the book topics for you that I was just curious about. You've written several books. You are an academic. You research prolifically. How do you decide what you're going to write about next? Out of all the things you might decide to write about.
I can't tell you that I know ahead of time. This language book, for example, Magic Words, is something I've been working on in one way or another for the past 10 to 15 years across different areas of research. And so it's something that I eventually felt like had enough to say. My last book, The Catalyst, was less about my own research and more about problems I saw with companies I was working in a consulting capacity. It really just depends. But I think there's a lot of exciting stuff out there, and it's an honor to be able to share some of the behavioral science with the broader world.
And then final question, our last 60 seconds here. What are the top 3 most impactful books of your life, things that you recommend or that you would recommend to others?
That's a hard list to give out because there's so many books I love. So, I love what Dan Pink's writings. I love Charles Duhigg's writings. There are many people whose books that I love. One book in particular had a big impact on me personally was The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. It helped get me interested in why things catch on. Another book I love is Made to Stick by the Heath brothers. A really great book about how to communicate things more effectively. And one more is an oldie but goodie called Diffusion of Innovations, but it helps us understand why things catch on. It's probably at this point 50 years old, but even innovations like hybrid corn helping us understand why things become popular and the features that drive success.
Jonah, thank you so much for the time. The book is Magic Words. There'll be a link to it in the show notes. Everyone should absolutely go out there and pick it up, and best of luck with the promotion and the tour.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.